right. Well, everyone, thank you for being here. We are going to talk about blockchain and the social sector. And I have some amazing folks with me who are active participants in how the world is taking the technology and applying it to social impact. Beside me, I have Tricia Martinez, I have Becker, and I have Alex Gladstein. Folks, could you introduce very concisely who you are, what you're doing, and why do you think blockchain should be applied to social impact?
Great, I'll start. My name is Tricia Martinez. I'm the founder and CEO of Walla and director of the DAO Foundation. So Walla is a zero-fee mobile financial platform for emerging markets, and last year we issued the DAO, the DAO cryptocurrency to enable instant borderless free micropayments for consumers. So we've been building out a decentralized financial systems that enables consumers in these markets to earn, save, borrow, and transact with cryptocurrency. We're live in 3 markets in Africa, in the last 2 months have had over 100,000 consumers purchasing and transacting in an ecosystem we've created, and processed over 3 million transactions in crypto.
Okay, well, firstly, good morning, everyone. My name is Becker. I'm the head of risk at MakerDAO. What we do there is we supply a stable coin that looks to facilitate economic growth on the blockchain. But in this context, we're also hoping to do a bit of economic empowerment using the blockchain. One of our core foundational commitments is a 20% of earnings giving, specifically and to charity, but specifically focused on UBI. And to kick that all off, we have collaborated with the guys at ConsenSys Social Impact, Dether, and Sempo in a project called Bifrost that looks to deliver cash to crisis areas. So, thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Alex from the Human Rights Foundation. We're a nonprofit that focuses on promoting human rights where they're most at risk, especially in closed societies around the world. To us, there's kind of like 2 camps in the crypto blockchain space. There's governments, especially repressive ones, that are going to build centralized cryptocurrencies and blockchain projects to try and control and surveil their population. You're seeing this, of course, in China, Dubai, Saudi Arabia, many other places. And then, of course, there's Bitcoin and other open, decentralized projects that are potentially going to put power back in the hands of people, and you're actually seeing that in some societies that are beset by hyperinflation and corruption and authoritarianism. People are using Bitcoin as sort of an escape valve to have their value and store it in a way and use it in a way that governments can't inflate, and that's very interesting.
And lastly, Robert Greenfield, one of the co-creators of ConsenSys Social Impact. So our focus is really to enable and develop a community around the technology to create use cases and see what comes of those use cases. So that's certainly working with HRF, working with MakerDAO, hopefully with Walla in the future, and really creating a set of best practices when it comes to the development of blockchain applications and, in some cases, the use of cryptocurrency where needed in social impact as a whole. So starting off, from the highest level, where do you all think the current state of the social sector is when it comes to blockchain and it comes to cryptocurrency? Tricia, I'll start with you.
So what we really believe is that crypto is what's going to drive especially a financial revolution throughout emerging markets. Obviously, it can do a number of things. Our focus is the financial industry. I really believe that startups, that small tech companies that are building on the blockchain are the ones who are going to drive the impact. And it's not so much this is a social mission, this is an impact. It's more of these are where the opportunities are. There's massive problems in the world that need to be solved. And cryptocurrency can solve a lot of those problems. So in my opinion, I see it more as still this tech community that's driving, that's building and executing, rather than the traditional, non-government organizations or these nonprofits who probably don't have the technical capacity to be doing those things.
Stephen?
From the MakerDAO point of view, it's not so much a case of trying to rehash or recreate what's already out there, but maybe combine it in a way through our decentralized efforts to find the best of breed in every aspect of the charitable works that are out there and combine them together to be more effective and to be more responsible with respect to what they're doing. So for us, the real heartbeat of this is the decentralization, to make sure that we can impact clearly what the message is through combinations of strategic partnerships and effective charity work and implementation.
I guess I would describe the space and the industry as maybe kind of easily manipulated right now. The human rights community as a whole is very uninterested or not involved with cryptocurrency and blockchain projects. And I think that's kind of creating an opportunity for especially repressive governments to come in and work with some of the big names in the industry to do things where normally in other fields they would be reprimanded for doing something. So if you create like a big project and you do business with the Saudis, normally, you know, that would be a problem. You'd want to like sweep that under the rug. And instead in the blockchain space, it's like something people are really happy and excited about, and they're announcing it on their web pages. So this is like something IBM was doing, for example. So normally you wouldn't, you know, be tweeting about your new project with the Saudi government in a happy way. You'd normally be not trying to say anything about it at all. So I do think there's like some serious need for more education, more dialogue around human rights in the space. That's kind of like a meta viewpoint, but on the like sort of micro side of it, where people are building stuff, it's very exciting. I mean, I think that we have obviously a very centralized model of data ownership and of interacting with the internet, both here in let's say San Francisco and the United States with sort of Web 2.0, Google and Amazon, Facebook, and then also obviously in the world's largest country in China with this kind of giant surveillance cloud powered by WeChat and other apps that suck up all your data and behavior and make it available to the Chinese government. And I think basically in my mind the only real way we can kind of fight this is by creating a decentralized platform by which people can take a little more agency and own their own stuff. And as we heard earlier today, there's not really like a market interest in that. People don't really care about their privacy. So I really think that these platforms, these decentralized platforms, have to be built in a way where they're performant better than the centralized opposition, or else there's really not going to be user adoption. So I think that's kind of like where I think we need to be looking at.
Yeah, what I've seen through a lot of the use cases that either we've co-led, you know, with partners like yourselves, or that we've seen, you know, individuals, you know, spawn up and create like instances like Walla, is that oftentimes I think that the technology is there when it comes to emerging tech, but what's usually missing, or which is most difficult to get, is the policy collaborators, right? In order to formalize, okay, we have the availability of this technology to work, you know, 10x more efficient than, you know, a traditional system, or, you know, has some type of attributes that make things more accessible to underserved communities. But at the same time, there's a tentativeness from legacy social impact foundations or organizations that are unsure about the monetary policy associated with using cryptocurrencies for social impact, or any legal implications of using dApps in general, and how that challenges the way that they operate. And, you know, most currently we see a lot of fintech applications, so the current financial application or system and so forth. And that leads me to the next question for you, Alex, to start off with. What aspects of blockchain and cryptocurrency do you think makes social impact organizations most tentative? What prevents them from taking that first step, even to create a sandbox or a pilot to see if their organization would want to use the technology?
Yeah, I would kind of call it the John Oliver problem. So there was this like really popular John Oliver skit about cryptocurrency that kind of like smart, intelligent people watched and laughed at. And you have a lot of the population kind of dismissing cryptocurrencies and blockchains based on the enormous scams and fraud that takes place in this space. I mean, of course, as we all know, 95% of all these projects are either too ambitious or outright fraudulent. And that does create this, we have to be apprehensive of the environment, right? But what it's unfortunately doing is it's kind of like distracting people from the really valuable, fundamental, revolutionary aspects of Bitcoin and other decentralized open blockchains that may actually provide a different way for humans to coordinate with each other in kind of a historical way. So I think to answer your question really specifically, people are apprehensive because they're not educated and they just haven't dug in and read about it. And as a non-technical person, I'll admit it took me a long time to kind of figure out why this stuff was interesting. So I think the more we can do to bridge the communities, at least in my world of the human rights space, the more we can do to connect activists, environmentalists, journalists with the actual content to educate them on what Bitcoin and Ethereum and other platforms are and how they function and how they're unique and different and what they can do for you would be really great.
I'm going to jump in. I think you're right. I think there's a number of issues that exist in the space right now. So one, in the crypto space, everything is about one moon, Lambo. You know, we get really hyped about these, growth and volatility. And unfortunately, most people who are day trading and participating in the space are not necessarily looking at crypto as the solution to creating a revolution in the other side of the world. They're looking at it as a way to make money. And reporters and the media are not representing the real projects that exist, the people who are building things in refugee camps and in Africa and other parts of the world who have actually used the technology to start building out real use cases and have users and real traction and momentum. And I think that's the problem. Crypto and blockchain is really complex. Think back when the internet came around. No everyday consumer understood how the internet worked, and I guarantee most consumers still don't know how the internet works, and that's fine. You don't need to really understand the ins and outs of it, but because it's the beginning phase of this technology, people are very fixated on the fact that you have to know exactly how it works. So I think it's just about changing the dialogue onto what the potential is, but then also showcasing what's actually happening around the rest of the world, because the US is not the only place that's operating in crypto and blockchain, and I would actually argue that the rest of the world is far more advanced in some of this technology.
Well, I look at this space in terms of historical context, and I think to myself, well, where has this happened in the past? I'm from the sort of traditional finance space, and I think about mutual funds back in the 1920s when they first came out. The papers were all ablast with the fact that this horrible scam is upon us. Now, this has been habituated to a point where everyone has it in their 401k. We had a look at where that is and where it is now, and we have a look at where we are with cryptocurrency and more the blockchain space. The same thing's happening. We're going through those typical frictions where it is perception and education, and you have to have a champion. And then you also, on the other side of a champion, you're going to have villains. And we're going to have to fight that out until we can get plausible momentum to push this through to be accepted appropriately. So it is a challenge, it's an abstraction, and obviously we're all here trying to figure out how to do that.
And moving from, the tentativeness of social impact organizations toward maybe an understanding of how policy can better inform, the architectures and solutions that are being put out there. Of what we've seen so far, what do you think is the most misguided tenet of dApps when attending to social impact problems? So where do you think technologists are misstepping when they put their solutions out there, when they put their, you don't see as many white papers now, but when they engage the world and say, we're trying to impact or affect, this type of change, where do you think technologists are misstepping?
Can I jump in there one quickly? The one aspect I'd like to unbundle from there is not the fact that they're missing it. I kind of like the fact that they're trying to do it in the first place. It's literally aiming for a dartboard, throwing your dart, but being blind. And if you hit it, then everyone's going to learn from that. It's going to be an iterative process. You're going to find where it works, where it doesn't, and what one hopes is that this technology does iterate into something useful. But in terms of the actual technology and where there's a misstep, well, I can't speak to that specifically.
Yeah, I would also argue that technologists are different from executors. So you can have technologists who are not entrepreneurs and they can build great technology, but unless they're able to execute, get users, go out there, be proactive, get the support they need, the technologies never get in the hands of consumers or to the end user. And I would also argue that it is probably a misstep to ask for permission. I think that the regulators lack the education and understanding of what this technology is. So if you go ask permission for what you're doing, they will automatically say no and start asking you questions. I know that's an aggressive thing to say, but we're in a time where you need to prove the real impact. You need to show the regulators, look at the potential for this. Look at what we've done. We've banked X many people, or done X, Y, Z. We've put so many people, given them, you know, a self-sovereign identity. Like, sometimes it's not about working with the regulators, because sometimes they just don't really understand.
Yeah, I think with dApps, there's probably two victories. One would be a smaller victory, where you kind of have in today's society a really small percentage of people who really care about privacy, who really care about their freedoms, and they use things like Tor, and they were using PGP, and now they're using Signal, and it's a very small part of the population, and you know, maybe that's a victory to keep that alive and to allow a decentralized money network to grow and to allow us to transact without government surveillance and censorship. I mean, that's certainly a victory, but I would urge developers and investors to think about the bigger picture of, you know, when you're making dApps, like, you got to be competing against Facebook and WeChat, basically. And the goal is to make a world where you win, right? Where your stuff, where users own their data, or at least have the option of being the owner of their data. Look, I mean, if most people want to be custodial, that's probably human nature, and that's probably going to happen. But at least on a basic level where you actually would own your data, you own your money, and you get to choose who gets to look at it and who gets to surveil it, you know, that is a foundation for apps that have tens of millions of users, is something we should strive for, because or else the sort of WeChat model is going to win. And you know, Tencent is moving very aggressively into the United States. I would not say, it would be outrageous to suggest that in 10 years, a lot of Americans, maybe even a plurality of Americans, will be using WeChat. That could very easily happen. So, and you got to remember, these apps take everything about you, every single behavior point, location, phone call, click, like, it just all gets sucked up. So if we don't want that world, we have to really build these sort of, let's say, dApps and structures and protocols that protect our rights and freedoms, and that do it in a way that are, again, like performant comparable, you know, at a minimum.
And to Tricia, your point about execution, I agree that oftentimes, and this is coming, you know, for myself as a developer, that you get so strung up in getting, you know, the milestone completed, right? Getting the development roadmap out of the way so that you can show, you know, in some cases with budding social enterprises, impact firms, that you're investment ready, and in other cases, just trying to get your first partner on, that you lose sight of, one, you know, the lean startup methodology in terms of quick iteration, interviewing. For some reason, when it comes to the blockchain space, we think that it's like a different process, and that this isn't just an application like it was before, and that you don't have to do the same due diligence. What are some steps, I mean, obviously, given you all's incredible growth, what are some key steps that you would tell people, you know, social entrepreneurs entering the space, the first things to do when they think they're attending to, you know, a particular problem?
So I think the problem with the crypto blockchain space is the entire, like, ICO bubble, whatever we want to call it, that you have these companies who are essentially an idea on paper, who have raised exorbitant amounts of money, which removes any sense of urgency to deliver. And as an entrepreneur, you need to be hungry constantly, right? Like, you need to be able to deliver to get your next round of funding, which is why we're seeing companies who are raise $30 to $50 million, and they say, oh, we'll release our product on mainnet in 3 to 5 years. And that just slows down innovation, it slows down growth, because they don't have the urgency to deliver. And I think we've created this really terrible ecosystem around that, and it's starting to correct itself, and these token sales will start, you know, being eliminated because there's more governance that comes into place. But for anyone who's trying to jump in, you need to be customer first. You need to understand the problem, be on the ground with the customers, understand why they're dealing with these problems, and build for them, and prove to people that you can deliver something really quickly. It doesn't make sense to just build and build and build, because unless you test, you're going to find out that you're wrong down the road.
And Stephen, from your perspective, obviously more on the tech side, you know, MakerDAO's done an excellent job, you know, executing when it comes to, you know, creating, you know, the first, you know, decentralized stablecoin, but also one that is very transparent about its governance and its milestone to transition as it gains more and more adoption. What are some steps that your team takes to ensure that it's very purposeful in the steps that it takes, both in terms of gaining trust from the community, but also making sure that it works.
Well, the first sense of it is, as you said, it's first and foremost decentralized. That notion has to be made clear, and the way that notion is made clear is by being particularly open with respect to every step you take, and then saying, well, what is this purpose? What is it we're trying to achieve? Coming back to your first point, in order to identify with a societal impact that you're trying to remedy, you have to experience it. You have to be firsthand in it. You have to understand the cultural and social construct around it, and then reverse engineer out what it is that you want to do. I think from Wireless' point of view, it's pretty much well baked in, so that's why I think it's quite a good organization. From our point of view, we've come out with a more economic with a social bent in terms of our purpose. We do have a foundational commitment to committing 20% of our earnings. But that being said, we've heard that before. And it could be seen as some sort of a window dressing. But in this sense, to be able to first say, well, what is your underlying core belief? And for MakerDAO, that's unconditional or universal basic income. So we're going to try and reverse engineer from there and say, okay, well, how do we make it impactful? How do we go from, well, we have this notion where we want to give 20% of our earnings all the way to effective altruism on the ground, but also representing very clearly that we need to understand where this is going to so that it is effective.
And Alex, from the nonprofit side, obviously HRF is one of the best at community organizing, particularly between very, very diverse communities. How do you think technologists need to engage the organizations that you are very familiar with, whether it be governments, whether it be people of influence who have already shown that their solutions work? Mm-hmm. How does the community organizing aspect contribute toward activating the newest solutions?
Yeah, well, I think the two decisions you want to make as a developer, technologist, one is to learn about how that technology is actually being used around the world. So, if you start with Bitcoin and go from there, I mean, people are using it as an escape valve to remove themselves from, situations where governments have totally destroyed economies, and people are using it as a lifeline. And maybe you want to go down there and talk to people in countries like Venezuela or Iran, and look at how people are on a daily basis kind of using it. I mean, that might be interesting. So we've been working together with ConsenSys at the Oslo Freedom Forum event series to kind of connect technologists with people from countries that don't have freedom of press, that don't have local nonprofits, that don't have sort of checks against government power. So having those conversations can be very important. The other point I want to make is like your decision as what you're going to work on as a technologist. There's actually some insight this morning from, and this may seem weird, but Arthur from BitMEX, which again might seem weird given that it's a platform associated with a lot of gambling and risk, but he made some really good points about decentralization. And if you're going to start working for a team of people and you're working on something decentralized, that's a little bit almost of a paradox in terms, meaning like, can the government come get you? So, I think people need to start thinking about themselves as a contributor to an open project with like a lot of different contributors to it, and that kind of also reduces your personal risk. If you're working on an open project with, let's say, 3 or 4 or 5 different companies, it's a little safer, right? Especially if you're doing something that is taking power away from governments, meaning a decentralized money network. People are going to come after you. So if you're working as part of a big open network, that's kind of something that might be smart. Whereas working on a small team, you're an easy target. He was kind of Arthur was poking at the idea of a decentralized exchange. And if there's like a person saying, hey, we're running a decentralized exchange, I mean, the government's going to come in and shut you down. So, but working on an open network where there's 5, 6 different companies and a whole bunch of different research institutions working on an open source project, then it's a little different.
I definitely think there's an interesting dynamic between the co-development of projects amongst companies or nonprofits and, to your point earlier, the needing or not needing to ask permission to get things done, because you do get into interesting situations, and we're seeing this with Project Bifrost, and I'm sure you've seen this in Uganda and South Africa, where you finally have, right, a product, you've scoped out the problem, now it's how can I implement this in a way that I don't get, persecuted by the government given their current stance? And it's interesting how that parries when you're trying to do a good thing versus implementations in Venezuela where, it's asset-based ICO, trying to escape sanctions and this, that, and the other. And how kind of those two use cases can work off each other in a positive way in that, governments can realize, okay, we should take these steps and work with, companies like MakerDAO, like Walla, like HRF, or, we're just going to be ultra conservative and just not allow any of it to, exist until we, gain some type of holding. The last question that I wanted to ask was more about social equity within the blockchain space as it is. So looking at Bitcoin and Ethereum just for a point of reference, we're starting to see with Ethereum the movement to proof of stake, and questions are being asked as to the representation of the blockchain economy, both in terms of who has the most wealth, right? Who has the most tokens in a very token-based, consensus mechanism, and how that affects, one, the creation of, new solutions, whether it be an impact or, commercial ventures, and how that affects the network's growth and evolution. When we do see, crypto millionaires, billionaires, and things like what's happening in Puerto Rico with this somewhat neo-colonialist kind of edge to it.
So it's just a comment.
Yeah.
Okay. So yesterday we announced here that we're moving to a multi-chain asset strategy. So we believe as an organization that there will be a handful of blockchains that rule the world, and we want to work with the best blockchains depending on our use case. We're using Stellar for payments, Ethereum for our smart contract capabilities. We believe that we need to surround ourselves by the blockchains that actually have those developer communities, right? Whenever you see developers gravitating towards something, that's where the innovation is going to take place. That's where the growth will happen, so we're really bullish on those. I would say the question that we always get is, why did you issue a crypto token? Why not use Bitcoin? Why can't Bitcoin be the transactional asset for Africans or emerging market consumers? And it's simple. It's too valuable an asset. Even with Lightning Network, it's way too expensive and too slow to transact with, especially when consumers are transacting on average 27 cents per transaction or payment. And so for us, it's about moving and creating new systems that are actually designed for these consumers. Bitcoin was not designed for the emerging market consumer, and I don't think it will ever be there. And so I think that it's not so much about where is all this wealth taking place, it's where are the networks and where are they growing, and how can we utilize these different technologies to build new things and keep building on top of that innovation, which is what we're doing.
To just provide a counterpoint and an alternative viewpoint, obviously Bitcoin's not fast and cheap right now, but you could get in there and build it, and you could help it become faster and cheaper. I think that's like one very, very strong possibility. And the fact that it's censorship resistant and that no government owns it is a very compelling idea, especially if you work in the nonprofit space and you don't want to be attached to a certain company, let's say. The idea that activists and revolutionaries and governments and pretty much anyone can have their own sort of perspective on it is very, very interesting. So just something to consider.
Yeah,
Stephen?
I just want to jump in on that. So the issue is that, in our mind, is that it is too valuable of an asset, and for any crypto to be successful, you need distribution. And so Bitcoin doesn't exist in these markets. People are not transacting with it. They're not using it. And so to say you can throw this cryptocurrency on people and it adds value is completely false, because just handing Bitcoin to someone does nothing when they can't go to a merchant and transact with it, or a retailer, or pay their bills, or do any of these other things. Of course, there is potential there, but it's just not happening yet, which is why there are new companies building these things.
And I want to jump in because I want to give Stephen a chance, because I know on the other side, when we're discussing right now kind of the functional value of a cryptocurrency, whether it be Bitcoin or Ethereum. In Ethereum's case, right, moving to proof of stake, not to make things too technical, but has MakerDAO seen kind of a skew in terms of who's opening up collateralized debt positions? Is that coming from the same few public addresses? Do you think that will change as we move toward proof of stake and people realize you know, hey, I've had 10,000 ETH since the beginning. You know, I can take advantage of the system in ways that people in emerging economies who are just being introduced to some of these technologies or just resources that make it available wouldn't be able to do so.
Well, looking at the time ticking down there, I'm just thinking to myself, the most easiest and salient idea is to realize that this is not a mature industry. We have all the features of a nascent industry. Plutocracy is one of them. And you have to deal with it. You have to deal with it in the best way you can and hope through an iterative process we find ourselves, again, gaining that momentum to get through this. But to look at it and think there's a deterministic aspect to fix it is folly. You have to work as participants in this field to make sure that we can define this landscape clearly. And in so doing, we'll find where those solutions come more organically.
Excellent. Well, thank you, everyone. We are at time. I appreciate it. Again, guys, we have Tricia Martinez, Stephen Becker, and Alex Gladstein from Human Rights Foundation. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.